Okay, so thank you very much to Steph and to Talia for the invitation to speak today. I'm Lynn Woodley. I'm the director of the Centre for Scientific Collaboration and Community Engagement at AAAS. And we're really interested in how it is that scientists collaborate and how it is that we can support them in doing so. And that often involves the use of online tools. So in thinking about today's topic, there's a lot of different ways that I could have approached this question. And I decided that what I'd actually do was lead us through a little bit of theory, because I think that gives us some useful foundations, some useful ideas that we can then apply to the various different projects that we might be working on. So today's talk is going to be about 3 different key roles that I see existing in online technology adoption and usage. So that's selection, implementation, and ongoing management of the community tools. So, but first of all, what qualifies me to speak about this? Let me just introduce myself and give you a little bit of background about how I ended up in this space. So I'm a scientist by training, but after having a brief research career, I actually worked at Nature Publishing Group for 5 years. And that was back in the day that we called online tools Web 2.0 technologies. We were very interested in the idea of creating collaboration tools to help scientists to work together remotely, to work together online, and to take advantage of all the promise of the internet. Now, that evolved into what we would now call a community manager role. So social media came along. I was responsible for championing our blogs, our social media strategy, but always sitting at that intersection of people and technology. So sometimes wearing a product management hat and often thinking about editorial content. From Nature Publishing Group, I've ended up winding my way to AAAS. I've been involved still with technology, with the platform that we built called Trellis, which was another communication and collaboration platform. And now more recently with training for scientific community managers. So the people who are responsible for ensuring that scientific collaborations are successful. And again, many of those use online tools in order to do that. Now, of course, as many of us are increasingly aware, and many good conversations are happening in this space, you can't work in the community space without really considering diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how it is that we make spaces that are welcoming and inclusive of everybody. So I'm also involved in some National Science Foundation funded initiatives looking at DEI online, and also researching online communities, so looking at the role that having a community manager plays in ensuring that these communities are welcoming. So all that to say, it's been a fantastic route and a fantastic set of experiences that all centre on bridging between people and technology within science and what we now call community building. So moving on to the topic of today, in thinking about kind of online tools and various technologies that have been developed over the years, I'm sure we've all heard the phrase, if you build it, they will come. So there's a lot of enthusiasm for how the internet, web tools would actually help us to bridge across geographies, to connect people who might not otherwise be able to work together. There's so much that we can do with access to these tools. Except, that I'm sure as many of us have experienced, just building the tool or just putting the tool in place doesn't always ensure that you have a thriving community. So I'm sure we've all seen one of these ghost towns, abandoned houses, where you go along and actually nobody's hanging out there at all, and things really look a little bit run down, and maybe even functionality has gone out of date and doesn't work anymore. So why might that be? Why don't we just automatically see the fruition of the fact that we're connecting people together online? And this is really where our work and our interest in community engagement and community engagement managers come in. So typically what you see is in a community that actually invests in human infrastructure and not just technology, so people or a team of people who are helping to facilitate the community activities, then you're going to see a lot more engagement. So you're going to shift from the typical 99-1% ratio that you see to really moving that much more to sort of a 60-40 split, where 40% of your community members are actively contributing to what's going on. So we define community engagement as the set of activities that facilitate the productive functioning of a team, group, or community. So that can include everything from onboarding activities to the day-to-day running of the community. And this cartoon here from one of my favourite books at the minute, No Hard Feelings, shows just why it's important to have somebody playing that welcoming role. And that somebody is a community engagement manager, or a CEM. So that's the person who is really overseeing or facilitating others in those community engagement activities. So what do community managers actually do, and how does that relate to today's topic? So in collaboration with some of the 2017 fellows of the AAAS Community Engagement Fellows Programme, we've devised this skills wheel that shows 5 core competencies or 5 core skill sets that scientific community engagement managers have. So surprise, surprise, there is an emphasis on strong interpersonal skills and communication skills. So that speaks to things like empathetic onboarding, making sure that we're thinking about being inclusive and fair in our spaces. There are also skills that fall under program management, so the day-to-day keeping things running, and program development, so ensuring the long-term sustainability of the community. But the 5th of these skill sets are the technical skills, and that's what I really want us to think about in more detail today. So what I'd like to do is outline what I see as 3 broad roles that are important for successful technology adoption and usage within communities. And I'm going to list these as, firstly, the identification of technology needs. Secondly, the implementation of a digital habitat, and this is a phrase that comes out of the social learning space, and we're going to learn a bit more about that in a moment. And thirdly, ongoing community engagement to make sure that when the tools are in place, everybody feels able to use them and that it's clear what's actually possible with those tools. So if we start off with number 1 in identifying technology needs, I'd like to briefly introduce you to this framework that's been created by Wenger, White and Smith, and that's the same Wenger, Etienne Wenger of Communities of Practice fame. So he's done a lot of work in terms of thinking about learning spaces online and off, and also contributing to think about how we use technology in those spaces. So what this team has identified is a range of what they call 9 orientations that may be visible in various different communities that use online tools. And an orientation is really a set of activities that the group wants to do. So for example, if we look on here, we see that meetings is an orientation, we see that cultivation, context, open-ended conversations, these are all orientations. So if we dig down a little bit more into the meetings orientation, this might be shown as technology needs that include, how do we identify what time we can meet together? How can we send calendar invites and track RSVPs? Can we meet via video and record the session? Can we screen share? Maybe we want to do live note taking. Maybe we want to archive and share the notes and recording afterwards. And so each of these gives an indication of the kind of tools, the kind of features that we're going to need if that's one of the orientations that our community is interested in. Typically what we see is that a community will have 1, 2, maybe 3 of these dominant orientations at any one point in time. And so that can just help us when we're thinking about what tools to emphasize, what tools to create documentation for or tutorials for, what it is that is important to our community right now. The other thing to note is that these things don't stay static. Many things with communities don't. And so an orientation that's very dominant right now may drop off in 6 months or a year as the community matures or as the community decides that its focus is shifting to doing something else together. And that's perfectly fine. We can come back to this model and have a rethink. So I just find this useful for asking the question of our own communities about whether or not we can identify the main activities that we're trying to do with our tools. So the second role I wanted to identify was this implementation of a digital habitat. And so digital habitat is a phrase that Wenger, White and Smith have coined. And it really describes the combination of features, tools, platforms that community members use in their work together. So it's where they live to do their work, if you want to think about it that way. And a habitat can actually be composed of multiple different elements. So for those of you who like sort of thinking about things in a phylogenetic way, we can start at the bottom with a feature. So a feature is just a specific functionality of the tool that enables a task to be done. So something like upvoting would be a feature. A tool is a collection of 1 or more features that support a discrete activity. And so we might group a bunch of things together, like being able to start a conversation, add an image, reply and upvote into a discussion tool. Tools can be packaged together into platforms, and often what we see now is a single login will enable us to access all of those tools in one place. But typically, because no one platform tends to give us everything that we need, we now also talk about habitats or technology stacks or configurations, which is the full suite of different technologies and tools that we're using for the community to be able to deliver its activities. Okay, so why am I labeling all these definitions? I think what's interesting to think about from a community perspective and a community management perspective is how do we integrate across all of those different levels? So if we know that we can identify that we need a specific functionality, how is it that we're enabling community members to join between a functionality in one place and a tool somewhere else, or even the entire suite of things that we're clustering together? And what Venn and colleagues identify is 4 different ways in which integration can occur. So the obvious one is that we gather all the tools together in a shared space, or if we're fortunate enough to have the budget to build a platform from scratch, we decide, that we're going to cluster them all together physically there. But there are other ways that we can achieve this integration. So it might be that the technical way in which the tools are built enables there to be interoperability. So enables us to do things like single sign-on and jump easily between one tool and another, or enables metadata to be pulled between the various different tools that we're using as an easy import-export of data. Another way that we might achieve integration between tools is user-led. So rather than it just being dependent on whether or not the technology allows us to do something, it's more around the culture of how community members decide to integrate between the different tools, or to integrate between features and functionality within the same platform. So an example of this is tagging. We might go all around one specific platform and tag the various different content there, such that when we click a tag, we pull together the information from the various different tools that are clustered together on that platform. And that's a user-led activity, and one that may be cultivated together between community members. And then finally, we may decide to build or to signpost familiar pathways between the tools. And often that might be what a community manager does. So say, for example, on this webinar today, were we to be taking notes, say, in Google Docs at the same time, then Steph, in introducing the webinar, might have signposted, hey, everybody, there's a link to the Google Doc in the chat. And then any of us who are interested could have clicked through to that. And then if she set the permissions on the document correctly, we will all be able to view and edit that. So the pathway from this particular Zoom tool for the webinar over to that Google Doc is seamlessly illuminated for us. So I find this a helpful way for really thinking about how it is that we can get tools to hang together, especially when we have complex technology needs and we might actually be using different tools in different places. So it can be useful to ask what integrations are already visible in my community, other ones that actually I haven't thought about but I should be asking questions about. And then who decides what these integrations are? Is this being dictated by a community manager or by the specific functionality of the tool that we selected or purchased? And who maintains them? How much of this can be put in the hands of community members and therefore allowed to be grown somewhat organically so that we can create pathways that work for us. And then the third of the 3 roles that I see for a community engagement manager is the ongoing community engagement. So how it is that we support community members in the use of the tools that are in place. And I just want to highlight 2 broad ways that we can think about that. And one of those is through direct programming and facilitation. And that can look like various things. So that might look like signposting. So that can include how and where to contribute, so what your onboarding schedule is, what you can do as a new member. But it might even get down into the details of tutorials on how to use particular functionality if things are particularly complicated, or if the users that you're working with are just really unfamiliar with this and that you want to make things easier for them. Another role of the community manager can be in synthesis and storytelling about how we use the tools. So, for example, creating a newsletter that might include a series of links that easily point members in one place out to all the other places where they can go and interact with content. Another thing that the community manager might do is reporting out. So if you've got various different working groups, for example, within an overarching community, playing the role of that glue that is helping people to understand at a high level what's happening in other spaces in which they may not have the time to be fully present, can be valuable and help shortcut needing to kind of be everywhere within the tools ecosystem at once. And then finally, just making sure that we're always thinking about this through the lens of diversity, really, again, thinking about the technology familiarity of the various users that we're working with, and making sure that we're not privileging certain voices over others because of familiarity with the technology or because of the way that we're choosing to moderate or not what is happening with the tools that we use. And then the second thing that I just want to point out here in terms of ongoing community engagement is the importance of feedback. So I hinted when we were thinking about the technology choices that we made, that things don't generally tend to stay static within communities. So making sure that we're sampling both through interviews and community surveys, but also through looking at usage metrics can be really helpful for seeing how our community's needs are evolving and whether or not perhaps something is missing in terms of a feature or a tool, and whether there's something that we might need to add or change in terms of our toolbox. So in summary, what we've covered very briefly today is that online communities are typically more likely to thrive when they have dedicated human infrastructure, so a community engagement manager. And if you're interested in learning more about them and what they look like and what they do, there's lots of posts by staff from the centre and also both cohorts of the community engagement fellows on our blog. And then secondly, from a technology perspective, we've thought about three broad roles in community management. So thinking about understanding technology needs, thinking about how we set up a digital habitat, and then thinking about how we support the ongoing usage of the technologies that we have in place. And if you're interested in more on 1 and 2, I highly recommend the Wenger, White and Smith book, Digital Habitats, which really goes into this in a lot more detail than we have time for today. So thank you very much for listening.
Sorry, I was chatting with someone. Thank you so much, Lou. That was fascinating. Shah, did you want to put your question to Lou that you dropped in the chat?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, my question was, I was just curious how much of this information is available to people outside of the AAAS group. Is this online? Is it kind of open for anyone to see?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I pointed to the blog. That is the largest freely available resource of information about scientific community management that there is online. So that's all freely available. There's over 100 posts there, which we hope have been well tagged in terms of thinking about everything from what it means to be a community manager to how to overcome challenges of things like stress, and things like programming for your community, event organization, all that stuff. So that's all freely available and you can check that out on the blog. One of the things we are going to be doing in the second half of this year is launching a community of practice for anybody working in this space. So we know that training somewhere between 20 and 25 people a year is not very many people to reach overall, and that not everybody can afford that kind of time commitment. So there's going to be a webinar series where we go into some of this theory in a lot more detail. I've been planning a book club as well with one of this year's fellows. So watch this space. We've got a newsletter that's linked to from the centre's website as well, and all of you are very welcome to sign up for that.
Hey Lou, do you want to